Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Alumni Book Talk. Today's book is Chrysalis, written by author Anuja Varghese. My name's Jennifer Hicks and I am the Director of Alumni and Stakeholder Programming here at TMU. We're really excited today to gather and hear more about this collection of stories. But before we begin, I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the land and the nature and the peoples on the land where our university is located today. At TMU, we've made more important commitments to reconciliation than ever before, and I invite you to learn about those the next time you happen to be on campus or by visiting us online. A couple of quick reminders. First, this session is being recorded and you'll be able to rewatch it and share it with friends after it has been posted on our site. You'll receive an email about that. And if you have questions at all during the book talk, you can submit them by typing them into the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try to get to some of those at the end of the session. Now I'm delighted to introduce to you the author of Chrysalis, Anuja Varghese, and the moderator for today's event, Sabina Chatterjee. Anuja is a writer of literary fiction, speculative fiction, and erotica romance, and combinations of all three, where women of color get leading roles. Her work has been recognized in the Prism International Short Fiction Contest, the Pigeon Pages Fiction Contest, and the Alice Munro Festival Short Story Competition. Chrysalis, her debut novel, won the 2023 Governor General's Literary Award, the 2023 Writers Trust Dane Ogilvy Prize for 2S LGBTQI+ Emerging Writers, and it was longlisted for the 2024 Carol Shields Prize for Fiction. She's also a professional grant writer, book reviewer, and editor, and we're very proud to call her a TMU alumna. Welcome, Anuja.
Thanks for having me.
Sabina Chatterjee is the project manager of equity, training, and partnerships with the Experiential Learning Hub at TMU. She's a longtime activist, artist, mom, and advocate for social justice. Before coming to TMU, Sabina had the privilege of supporting street-involved youth for over 20 years, and she's grateful for everything she learned from them. Her commitment to reciprocal relationships, story sharing, and decolonial equity-led community care is woven deeply into her work. Sabina loves exploring brilliant writing with others dedicated to social change and collaboratively plans and supports the Anti-Racist Book Club and the Rebirth Teachings Reading Circle. Welcome, Sabina.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic and the camera over to Sabina to get us started.
Great. Thanks so much, Jennifer. And hello to our author, Anuja. Before we jump into our talk today, I'm so excited about your book. I'd like to provide our audience a bit of a background about it. So in this debut short story collection, it draws on fairy tale, myth, magical realism to tell the genre-bending stories of transformation and belonging, centering women of color and exploring queerness, family, and community. She takes aim at the ways in which racialized women in particular are robbed of power and revels in the strange and dangerous journeys they undertake to reclaim it. And I have to say, it's a really wonderful collection of short stories that I really, really enjoyed. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and hopefully we'll have some time for audience questions at the end. So again, to the audience, please submit your questions via the Q&A function. So let's talk about how this book came to be. Why did you become a writer? It's a very simple question.
Is it a simple
question? And specifically a writer of short stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've sort of always been writing something, but it was always kind of like just for fun, right? I think I probably share this experience with many others in that my parents were not like terribly enthusiastic about the idea of a creative career. Like certainly, you know, write as a hobby, but also get a real job. So I was never considering it in a more serious way. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for my entire career. I still continue to work in the nonprofit sector alongside my creative writing practice. But it took a long time to get to a point. I ended up sort of losing a nonprofit job very suddenly. And in that space of, oh, what next? That was when I sort of had this moment of, I'm going to write and see what happens. And I had no idea if anything I wrote would be good or get published, or if people would read it. It was kind of this leap of faith that I took in that moment. And I'm obviously very glad that I did. So that's kind of how I sort of came to writing in a more sort of professional context. Why short stories? I love short stories to begin with. I think they're just a very sort of cool form. I love what you can do with this very sort of small economy of language. I think a short story can actually be really powerful, because you do need to do so much with every word. You don't have the same scope of a novel. So that's, I mean, certainly I just love the form, but also just from like a practical standpoint, I'm a mom and I have a full-time job. So when I started sort of thinking about getting back to writing and being more focused on building a creative writing practice, short stories just felt like a practical, accessible choice. That I felt like I cannot tackle a novel right now, but I can sort of within, 5,000 words, I can try and tell a really tight story. I can sort of have these small windows into people's lives, and I can polish that up, and I can get these things done and get them out into the world and see what happens. So a mix of loving the form, but also just a practical choice.
So many things are. And how lucky we are that you were brave enough to follow that dream too. Now, this book focuses mainly on racialized women reclaiming power. Why is this message so important to you?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's selfish. It's for me, right? I exist in a queer and racialized body. So I have not had that luxury of seeing myself represented in a lot of stories and a lot of popular sort of media, and even sometimes the ways that we are represented can feel, like very stereotypical or not true to like experiences that I've had or that sort of people in my life have had. Um, we're often portrayed as like victims or versions or nerds or sidekicks. There's like these sort of ways that we're pigeonholed, and I kind of wanted to show other representations. I wanted us to have space in stories where we don't usually, show up. So much of the types of stories that I love to read. So I love horror and fantasy and fairy tale, but so much of these stories traditionally never feature women of color, especially in like powerful roles, in main character roles. So yeah, I really wanted to give women who look like me a little of that kind of main character energy.
Which is really wonderful and so powerful, and especially sort of subverting that idea of submissiveness or dependence. And I think that especially the ways in which you've woven lots of different aspects of resistance, of claiming power, of affecting change is really powerful.
Yeah, we should get to be dangerous sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. And also that the power is taken in quiet and in loud ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of context for it. Sometimes it's through sort of the like quiet decisions that characters make. And then sometimes, they get to be shapeshifters and eat their enemies. Like both of those things are okay to do in a short story collection.
And many of us have wished to be able to at various points,
Yeah.
especially as South Asian queer folks, right? That the ways in which we are homogenized both in community, whether it's like familial communities or
Oh
in
yeah.
queer communities, I think that sort of longing for affecting change and affecting the change has been so important, right?
Oh, true story.
And so the title of the book, Chrysalis, can be defined or seen as change or growth. I didn't actually purposefully have that segue, but um, or a metamorphosis. So how are you continuing to grow and learn in your career?
Yeah, I mean, so Chrysalis, I think the stories themselves aren't like linked. It's not a linked collection, but Chrysalis, that idea of transformation is kind of the theme that links the stories. All the characters are in transformation in some way, and I kind of feel that all of us in our lives are in transformation, are evolving all the time, kind of whether you want to or not. Like you can either be pushing it forward or the world can be pushing it on you. Either way, right? That like change is that constant, I think, for all of us. So I mean, for me, that's always happening. Obviously, as I move more into my creative writing practice, that's always changing and evolving. As I'm, working on a novel now, that's a different type of creative challenge. I'm teaching sort of a creative writing workshop this summer. That's a different type of professional challenge. And it's just been interesting too. So in my nonprofit work, I work at the YWCA here in Hamilton where I live. So our kind of day-to-day work is all about empowering women. And you can sort of see how that day-to-day work has found its way into my writing. So those things really continue to influence each other in different ways, which has been an interesting kind of evolution in both of those careers.
For sure. And those sort of entangled tensions between them, right?
Yeah.
And I know that so it's interesting that you're saying that you're working on a novel now. Would you ever consider turning one of the short stories from Chrysalis into a novel?
You know what? So many people have asked me this, or like on social media, people will reach out and be like, but in this story, then what? Like, what happens? I'm like, I don't know, the story's over. So yeah, certainly I've had requests to continue certain stories. I do think so. The second story I think in this collection is called The Vitala's Song. It's sort of a half ghost story, half sapphic love story. And I think if I was going to turn something into a novel, it might be that one. I feel like there might be a little more to that story.
Well, and I certainly think that the skill of world building within a short story is so profound, um and that one, especially having been in that sort of geographic location, there was a visceral sort of response that I had to it and everything. So that's quite interesting. And so you said that you're working on a novel. Is there
Mhm.
anything that you would want to share, or are you not at that point?
No, so I suppose not super publicly announced, but y'all can have a little sneak peek, I guess, of what's coming more imminently. But so I'm working on sort of a fantasy trilogy, sort of set in like a medieval India inspired world. If you think about like a queer D&D campaign meets Bollywood's epic, that's sort of the world that we're in.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And are there particular parts of India that you think you might root that in, or is that asking too many questions?
Sort of like based in like 13th, 14th century, like South India, if you think of like Bangalore at that time, like that area.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, Now, as a successful alum making strides in the creative industry, what advice would you provide to current TMU students or grads who are listening?
What advice? Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, I think especially if you are in sort of a creative field or have aspirations to like have some type of creative practice. One thing I always kind of suggest is like always kind of remember that you only control what you create. Because I think it can be very hard, like you really get in your own head about like what people are going to think about what I create, how is it going to be received, how am I going to market it, how will it sell? Will it sell? Will it make money? All these things. And if it doesn't make money, was it worth the time? All these kind of different considerations, which you will have to think about, I suppose, at some point. But initially, you really only control what you create. So really, focus on that creative piece, nurture that creative side of yourself. Don't let your creativity get killed by all the other considerations around it. That's sort of my creative advice. And then I guess as well, just like be open to the possibilities of the world around you. You may have a very set career plan. That might be why you're at TMU. You might, you know what I mean? Like you might have a very clear idea of where you want to go. You may not. But either way, you don't know who you might meet tomorrow. You don't know what opportunities might come up. So my advice is just be open to possibility, be open to the world.
Beautiful. And I'm trying to be conscious of time. There are two more questions that I wanted to ask, and then I wanted to make sure that there was time for the Q&A. So one is, while your stories are filled with love and light, you're an obvious fan, and you've said it as well, of horror, fantasy, macabre, and which makes it, so it's so interesting because it is a really fascinating read. It also really is connected to a lot of the world making stories in India and in terms of mythologies and that kind of stuff. But do you have any favorite authors or stories that have influenced you, or would you want to have a shout out to a mentor who might have inspired
Mm.
you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So I've been really lucky, I think, to have some really great mentors along the way. Farzana Doctor, who's a Toronto-based author and just wonderful human, has been a really great mentor right from the beginning. She's one of the first to sort of read my stories when they were just stories on paper and say, like, maybe there's a book here. And I went, oh, maybe there's a book here. So you kind of need somebody who sees you, sees your potential, believes in what you could be, kind of before. But she kind of believed that before I did for me, and that was a big step, I think. So shout out to Frazetta. And just for other authors and stories that I have been inspired by, certainly that have inspired some of the stories in Chrysalis, Ursula K. Le Guin for sure, Anne M. Rice, Carmen Maria Machado. If I think about short stories in particular, obviously Alice Munro, Shashi Butt is another great one. She has a new short story collection out, which is fantastic. And then, so I really love kind of like big epic fantasy as well. So I've been reading Tasha Suri's fantasy. She has a trilogy out. Samantha Shannon. So yeah, a lot of great women writers, I think, have influenced these little stories.
That's so wonderful. And is there a short excerpt or quote that you'd like to leave us with from the book?
You know, just super short. I'll read the dedication of the book. Chrysalis. So the dedication of the book reads, this book is for all the girls and women who don't see themselves in most stories. You are worthy of reflection despite what you have been told. You're worthy of reflection despite what you have been told. I think so for so many of us, for different reasons. If you're a woman, if you're a woman of color, if you're a queer person, we get told in a lot of different ways by different people, sometimes by the people who are supposed to love us and support us, that we are not worthy, that we are not worthy of whatever, of love, of recognition, of moving forward in our careers. So we're not worthy in different ways. And especially when you don't see it represented, it can be easy to believe it, right? That we're not worthy of being reflected. So I always say, I hope that people pick as people are reading this book, they see a little of yourself. I hope you find a little mirror somewhere in these pages. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. There are a couple of questions. So one is, what are the challenges of being an author today, and what specifically are the main challenges faced by Brown authors?
Oh, geez. I mean, the challenges, I think, of being an author, like, I think any author will tell you, uh, like, reading is kind of a luxury. So I don't know any of the specific statistics around it, but I don't know sort of how many people read on a regular basis, how many people have, that luxury to go out and buy books, have the time to sit down and like read a book. So in terms of like being a working writer and publishing a book and hoping that your book sells and all of those things, it's super challenging. I don't think even the writers in Canada, anyway, who you would consider to be sort of successful writers, most of them are not full-time writers, right? We're all cobbling together the ability to continue a creative writing practice through other things, through teaching, through editing work, through different types of work. So I think it can be very challenging to sort of sustain your creative self while you're also trying to sustain all the other parts of your life. So I think that is just a challenge in general of trying to be a working writer. Challenges in terms of being a brown writer specifically, I've been, I think, fairly fortunate that our sort of publishing industry is actively trying, I think, to be more diverse, to be more inclusive of diverse stories. Most, at least sort of smaller independent publishers, are actively, if you look at kind of what are they looking for right now, most of them will say, like, we're actively looking for diverse stories, diverse authors. So I've been fortunate that there is that kind of support. But, I think there's internally, you have to look at sort of if you look at Canadian publishing, there's very few people of color in positions of power. So within kind of that we want these inclusive things, but even once you have them, when you're part of this sort of turning wheel, whose eyes are the marketing eyes? Who's in charge of selling it? Who's in charge of the cover design? Who's in charge of talking to other, publishers about it? Who's in charge of talking to booksellers about it? All these kinds of questions about how your work gets talked about, how your work gets sold, are not necessarily people of color. So I think that there's some work in terms of like publishing leadership to be done there.
For sure.
Mhm.
Okay, now more questions have flooded in. So, and
Away.
one is a couple of people asked if your creative writing workshop is open to the public, and if so, how do they sign up?
Yes. That's a good question. It is, so it's through U of T's like summer writing school. It's a week, it's like a super intensive week short story workshop. If you go to my Instagram, so it's at Anuja_V. I think I do have a post up about it with like the link in bio for how you register.
Excellent. Then other folks have asked, okay, there are a number of them. So one is, as a person of color in a space that needs more diversity, do you ever find yourself struggling with imposter syndrome, despite how accomplished you are? And if so, how do you manage it? What advice would you offer to people who want to pursue their own passions, but are scared?
Oh, I'll tell you a secret. We're all scared. Even the people, like, I promise you, even the people who seem, like they're doing really well, like you won awards, whatever, everyone when you come back to like your blank page or your blank computer screen, everyone's like, I forget how to do this. I can't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. I promise you, we're all there. We're all there all the time. So like two things have been helpful for me. One, as I said, like I've had really good mentors. So just to have those people who you can go back to and say, I forget how to write everything. I forget words. And then you have people who say, no, you don't. Who will talk you down from those moments. Also been super helpful to have like a writing group. If this is what you want to do, have like a writing group or be in community. Find out like what writing groups, events, festivals, workshops are happening wherever your local community is, and be a part of them. I sometimes feel like we all have that like imposter syndrome, especially like if you haven't yet had a book published or whatever. You're like, oh, am I like invited to go? Can I just go and show up? What if nobody talks to me? We have all these things. Just go. Just show up to things. Show up to book launches. Go to reading series. Go to festivals. Go to events. Go to workshops. If you can, right? Just go. And the more you go, the more you get to meet people. People are friendly at these things, I promise you. The more you can do that, the more you can be part of a literary community, the less you start to feel like that. The more you realize we're all doing this, the more other people you have to reach out to with it, especially if you have things where you're like, I don't know is it good? Is it a thing? It's great to have people who you can send it to and be like, is it good? Is it a thing? And, you know, sometimes you have people that say, yes, it's great, it's good. And sometimes you have, on the flip side of that, which I think all writers also need, you will have people who say, it's a thing, but it's a thing, but here's where I was confused. Here's what I would like to see. So you start to have some of that like constructive criticism, which can be really helpful for moving your creative practice forward.
For sure. And I really appreciate the fact that you talked about community and how like having writers groups, so often imposter syndrome is also connected to social inequities, right? The more we have it out, the more we question ourselves. And so having your people, whatever communities those are from, can really help. And as you also said, that the representation in the publishing community and stuff like that can make it feel even more daunting. So
yes,
making those connections are super important.
Okay.
Also,
like, I feel like what you see on social media, right, is we all post when we have great news to share, right? We post when we're nominated for something or you have some big book deal. So that's really what you will see publicly. It's only when you start sort of building these like, you know, writing groups that you have people to commiserate with that you realize, oh, you've had 50 rejections that led to one great book deal or whatever. So you get to be part of each other's writing journeys. And writing can be like a really lonely thing otherwise, without having people to be part of it with you.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to decide which other question to ask. So there are some questions around balancing deadlines between your nonprofit grant writing and creative practices. There's a question about advice that you were given that you carry. And then there are questions around what impression you'd like to leave on your readers. So which of those would you choose in the last couple of minutes?
I don't know. Say them again.
Okay.
What was the first one?
How do you balance the deadlines of your nonprofit work with creative practice?
Like I mean, I'm fairly fortunate, I think, that the YWCA has been is flexible, and I've been able to sort of talk to my team about kind of having a creative practice alongside my work. So yeah, if we're able to sort of be in communication with one job so that both things can have space, that's been very helpful. I also just you know, I will try to take myself on like a little self-directed writing retreat for like, you know, a long weekend or for longer periods with a novel. But to be able to do that has been helpful. So you have some time like that you can dedicate, really be in the world of your writing. So you're not also always thinking about your other deadlines. So if you can carve out blocks of time that you can dedicate to being in your own kind of writing world, it's sort of easier to balance it otherwise. What was the other question?
What lasting impression do you hope to leave your readers with?
Oh, I don't know. I think it goes back to that dedication again, that I hope that you're, especially if you are someone who doesn't otherwise see yourself reflected in the types of stories, especially in the types of stories that perhaps you love. You know what I mean? In genre in particular, we aren't represented. So if you don't see yourself out there, you're worthy of recognition, you're worthy of reflection. And if you don't see something that feels true to you, you can write it, you can create it, you can make it with your art.
That's really beautiful. I think that's a perfect place to.
I'm popping in now to interrupt, but what a nice segue. And I just want to thank you both, Anuja and Sabina, so much. That half hour flew by, but it
did.
really was wonderful to hear about the writing process and about your motivation and your all of your work and your celebrations. And we are so proud to celebrate you, Anuja, as an alum. It's fantastic to share your story, and obviously there was so much interest in hearing about that. Sabina, thank you as well for guiding this discussion. It was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us on your lunch break or whenever it might be, and watch for an email coming to you in the coming days. We will have this recording shared with you so that you can review it or share it with friends if you'd like. And stay tuned for other events like this online or in person. We certainly want to make sure that you stay engaged with your university and with your alma mater. So thank you again, Anuja and Sabina, for sharing your time with us today. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Goodbye, all.